I went to the American University of Beirut, one of the best universities in the Middle East. I studied economics, but it was a much more general program called PPE, which is Politics, Philosophy, and Economics. It gave me such a good background, and I really appreciate it even till today. Simultaneously, I went to law school because the law school used to be in the afternoon and evening. I go in the morning to the American University of Beirut. I mean, people had difficulty being in one. I was completely devastated being in two.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then I came in 1964. I came to the U.S. I was planning to go to England, and then one of my professors, who was a leading figure in the University of Chicago, insisted that for graduate work it's much better to come to the United States, and I did. And I studied economics and statistics at Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana. I graduated in 1969 with a PhD in economics and statistics.
Okay. And how soon after that did you transfer to Canada?
Well, 1968.
What were the challenges for you as a Lebanese immigrant coming into Canada, or were there any?
Well, to some extent, there were and there were not. One of the defining characteristics of Canada that was so appealing to me is that this multiculturalism, the celebration of diversity, this richness of so many different cultures that are celebrated, accepted, emphasized. And I felt comfortable being Lebanese and Canadian at the same time. Somehow, at McMaster for 47 years. I went several places from McMaster on sabbaticals or on leave. I taught at Cambridge University, I taught at Harvard, I went with the United Nations Industrial Development Organization in Vienna. I went to Iraq. I spent 2 years in Iraq working in the Ministry of Planning. But I always came back to McMaster. It's my home, and despite all the challenges or differences or difficulties, they were always minor. I always felt that Canada is hospitable. Canada is a place I can comfortably live in and raise a family, and I don't regret a single moment about this.
Do you think that Arab Canadians are misunderstood in Canada, or do you think that Canadians have a good kind of understanding of their background, and do you think that they're appreciated? I'm sure you know that there are some difficulties, especially these days.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question about it. That in the beginning, when I came here, the number of Arab Canadians was small, and we were not a very well identified communities. Events, particularly 2001, and then later on with ISIS, Daesh, and others, there is definitely a manifestation of Islamophobia, and uncomfortable to see people different clothes, different background, and different religions. There were many incidents, particularly in Hamilton. At one time, a bus load of people came in and urinated at the wall of a Sikh temple, thinking it's a Muslim temple. The issue of discrimination is often conflated, and it's often related to ignorance. Typically, Canadians are a little bit more open and more educated and more knowledgeable about the rest of the world, but there are segments here, and particularly those that are indoctrinated in not accepting differences, and these once in a while they get manifested. Our community is particularly vulnerable. Vulnerable not because just only different, there are so many other groups that are different, but there is some segments within the society that target the Muslims and the Arab. And one of the most unfortunate consequences of the Israeli-Arab conflict is attempt on some groups to malign, to distort, to misinform the public about the Arabs and Muslims.
All right. In that case, what should the Arab community do to counter this, to kind of reach out to the general Canadian population?
See, I, to some extent, find it difficult to blame the victim. We are victims in this. And we cannot really ask the victim to appease the victimizer. But there is no question about it. We have an obligation here to integrate and to engage in other communities. The natural reaction to protect yourself is to cocoon yourself within your community.
Right.
That does not help. We need to engage more. We need to educate more. We need to be open. We need to highlight and showcase the incredible contributions Canadian Arabs have made to this society.
Hello, this is Arab Canadians Making a Difference, another show, another interview, and this time my guest is Professor Walid Al-Khashab from York University, as far as I know. Are you from York University, Walid?
Yes, I went to the Jesuit school in Cairo in the 60s and 70s of the 20th century. A lot of people from outside of Egypt and definitely in Canada find it a bit strange that one is born in a Muslim family but then goes to a Catholic school. That was actually very common and still is quite common in Egypt because Catholic schools don't mind teaching or having students from all communities of faith, at least in Egypt.
The subject of study was actually had something in common with May, in that she also was into film and so on.
Yes.
So, okay, so that's a common interest. Yeah.
May Telmisani and myself are spouses, but also partners on many levels, and we share a lot of interests. We did our PhD on cinema, on Egyptian cinema. Both of us worked on the connection between national identity and modernity through cinema. She worked on the representation of the popular neighborhood, and I worked on melodrama, the emotional way of speaking about oneself, about the nation, about political and social issue in a manner that seems exaggerated. Melodrama is not just an entertaining type of spectacle. It's also a means of expressing oneself, a worldview that still is at works in today's cultures, both in North America and in the Arab world.
And what is the...
Let's say my first area, let's say, of activity is creative writing. I've published three poetry collections.
Okay.
So this is,
yes, I see one in Arabic there.
Yeah, I publish in Arabic. I've published a few poems in French, which I translated myself into French. But I write in creative writing. For me is in Arabic. This is my, let's say, emotional language. So this is Allati, or he who is a more technical book. That's a major book in French about oral poetry. Introduction à la poésie orale, or Introduction to Oral Poetry. That was written in the 90s by Paul Zumthor, who was one of the founders of the Department of Comparative Literature at the University of Montreal. Still today, it's a major reference about oral poetry worldwide and the theory of orality. So basically, what makes a poetry special when it is performed orally, not necessarily written to be read in a book.
Just my final question is, what advice do you have for Arab Canadians as far as their political activism in this country in order to improve things both in Canada and secondarily in the Middle East?
I would share my own experience. Let's say I know a lot of young people don't like the word advice, particularly when it comes from an older person. And I'm not sure I know a lot more than a lot of young people. But my personal experience is that, first of all, as Arab Canadians, I think one should embrace that. No need to be shy or to be ashamed. I've always used to say, not necessarily proud of being an Arab, but I'm not ashamed of being an Arab. And that's important. Being an Arab simply is about speaking an Arabic language or an Arabic dialect at home. One doesn't necessarily need to identify as belonging to a race that is Arab or to a political organization or a polity, just speaking Arabic. And it's important to assume that and embrace it, because especially in Canada, even if one wants to quote-unquote hide the Arabic dimension of their heritage, society won't hide that. Society will always remind those who have an Arabic heritage that you are somehow Arab. You have a connection to the Arab world. That's the first thing, I think, embracing the Arab dimension of one's heritage. It's something enriching. Now, years ago, Arabs didn't have a voice at all in public affairs in Canada. Palestinians, or those who sympathize with the Palestinian plight, couldn't have a really well-heard and well-articulate voice when it comes to defending the rights of Palestinians to have their own land, have their own state, have the ability to organize and manage their own lives. Now, a few people listen, a few outlets let those who sympathize with Palestinians speak. That does not necessarily translate into improving the terrible conditions in which Palestinians live in the Middle East, but at least there is an improvement. One should never think about efficiency, like in my lifetime I should see this or that issue resolved, such as the Palestinian issue. But there is improvement, even though the situation is dire today, and that makes us never lose hope.
I think that's very sound advice, and we always have to remember that Rome was not built in one day, as they say, and that all people who have succeeded in the past, they have actually worked very hard at succeeding.
I went to the University of Toronto.
Okay, and which faculty?
It was a special program called International Development Co-op, and I had a major in economics. So what that meant was that I could study for 3 years, travel overseas for a year, and then come back and continue studying for my last year.
And where did you travel?
So I traveled with Oxfam Quebec to Palestine for a year.
Oxfam. Okay, to Palestine, your father's country of origin.
Yes.
Yes. Where? In which city in particular?
I worked in Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem. All right.
Yes.
So were you kind of treated like a Canadian who's come to study over there?
I don't think so. In some ways, yes, but in some ways, no. So the first sign that I would not be was in Frankfurt Airport.
Yes.
And I think I might have actually missed that flight.
Oh.
Yes, I was kept behind for a very, very, very long time.
For so-called security reasons?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. They searched my ink pot for my fountain pen, my contact lens solutions.
Oh my God.
The most banal and ordinary items that you would pack became elements of...
I'm glad you have the courage to share that information with us, because the average Canadian doesn't hear that story. It's really important for people to know that. That's why we're doing interviews of this kind. Anyway, let's. So, how was your experience over there when you went with Oxfam? And how long did you stay?
The work experience was absolutely excellent. There were other experiences that coincided with that work experience that were very powerful and life-changing. And the work experience was wonderful. Within a year, I felt very comfortable in working in Arabic. I could type, I could speak, I could understand Arabic. And I worked in the field of environmental health.
I participated, I had my security clearance or top secret, exactly like the director of our organization. And so I was surprised that somebody is accusing me, his fellow Canadian citizen, his boss, I came to kill him. Which is...
By
so,
saying you people.
You people, yeah. And so I could not believe what I'm hearing, and I decided, coming from a legal background, my father used to be a judge, I decided to tell him to repeat what he said. So he repeated what he said, so I asked the visitor, sir, do you now see what he's telling me? He said, I'm shocked that he's saying that. So I told him, all right, now I will call the military police to escort him out, and he will have no job at the end of the day. Because this is outright prejudice against us and discrimination, which is totally against the Canadian Constitution. And now we don't know who attacked, who is the attacker, and why. So he jumped to the conclusion that because I came from an Arab country, that I must be one of those people who harbor ill will against Canada or against the States. Although I lived in the States for 5 years and I got some of my education there, But this is the first time since I came to Canada when somebody came straight in my face, and I'm his boss. I could have fired him, right? And the man was he left. Then he sent me his boss to apologize. And then the director of our organization came to me and he said, I apologize for what he said. We don't have any ill will against you or whatever. You have been working for us, and in fact, I got promoted 4 times, since I joined.
My guest today is Dr. Ed Napke, who is going to be talking to us about his life in Canada and his achievements. And so, Dr. Ed, tell me a little bit about your origins, where you were born, and how and when in your life did you move to Canada?
Yeah, it goes back 94 years. I was born in Zasli and Lebanon. Let's get the country in. And I came to Canada somewhere around 6 months of age or so. And from there I got my MD, and later on I got my diploma in public health.
So you're a medical doctor, and at the same time you also did specialty in public health, yes?
Yeah.
All right. And so what did you do after that?
I initially did locums instead of practice. I did locums in other people's practices and spent a great deal of time reducing the medicine load on patients. I thought it was too much that they don't know about in the drug products called medicines that they were getting.
We're talking about side effects.
Side effects,
Yes.
adverse reactions, what we call
Yes.
them. And I went different places and finally ended up in 1963 to take on the job of post-marketing surveillance, post-thalidomide, that horrible chemical that disturbed the physiology, so the children had armless or warped arms or what have you, very, very serious thing. And
Yes, it interfered with the growth of the limbs, and therefore, instead of having a whole arm, you just have the fingers coming out of your shoulder, more or less.
more or less, yes.
All right.
It was a horrible, but most importantly was that this occurrence shattered the then attitude that the placenta barrier would prevent bad things from crossing over and toxic things, and obviously that was broken with a sledgehammer, and we had to reevaluate our concepts about what medications were doing to people other than supposed to be helping them. I did not go into practice because I thought the practice could be covered by, was a very intelligent grandmother for most of the illnesses that occurs and comes into the office of the, but I decided that I'd have to do something more because I was overtrained for this kind of practice.
And of course, it's because
The new poison control program for Canada, and in fact, at one stage, every emergency across Canada was connected to my private phone number anytime they wanted to call. And I was very lucky to have a wife who would answer those calls. It was very important to make sure that your wife is involved with your work. That I had the data, I had not been able to process it, so I had two sets of data, one in the office and one in my home. And I had no pay for that. I was acting as a physician, caring for Canadians, and every moment would be important for the people in the emergency treating, have that at their hand. So we overcame that later on as modern technology came in, but initially 400 or so hospitals where we had the right to phone me and I would respond at my own pay.
well, I guess we could talk a lot about that, but time's running out now. But this is a great achievement, and I personally am proud of what you've done. I'm sure Lebanese and Arabs in Canada are also proud of such achievements. And talking about Arabs in Canada, as you know, there's a lot of controversy about what the Arabs do when they come to Canada, or what they bring with them, all the baggage that they bring with them from their own backgrounds. At the age of 90 that you are at now, and you've been here since you were a few months old,
Yeah.
what advice do you have for new immigrants that come from the Middle East?
Well, the most important advice is that you must obey the laws of the country you're coming into. This is Canada, and you're a guest and going to be a member of it. You have to obey the law. You cannot bring baggage from the country you have left into here with, and then continue the war, so to speak, with your own fatherland or motherland, whatever you want to do. And then, but you must participate in the activities of Canada as well. So you have to get involved with the politics of the land, because nothing changes unless you get involved in the politics to make changes in the law. So the laws where you came from are different than the laws here. And to say democracy, well, there are different kinds of democracy. So you have to have Canadian democracy, and even across Canada, what the law and activities in one province is different than what happens in other provinces. So this you have to be very, very cognizant of. It depends on where you're landing. If you're in the province of Quebec, that's different. Newfoundland is different. British Columbia, Alberta, wherever you are, those laws have to be there. But even more important, the federal government should ensure that you understand that you have to obey the laws here.
Before you come here.
Before you get here.
So how would the federal government do that?
Well, my suggestion, not that they've asked me, but it would be that in their native country, you go to the embassy or the whatever it is.
Like in Egypt or in Pakistan or whatever.
That's
Yes?
right.
All right.
And they will question you as to give you a sheet of paper of what the law is, and you have to say yes. And not only say yes, but you have to understand it. So it'll take time. Not over 1 hour or 2 hours. This is a long situation where you change your mind as to what is going on in the new country. So, like the approach towards children, male, female, we are allowed to mix freely male, female. Other countries, that's not allowed, but in Canada, it is.
Yes.
And that has to be done. You can't have honor killings because of somebody is looked at a woman or not looked at. The dress, we must be able to recognize it, because a mask here in Canada, robbers use that. You have to be identifiable by law. And you have to accept that. That makes the change in your religion, because you have religious right, but that above religious right is the law that says criminal rights.
The law of the land.
The land of the land. The law of the land, yes.
I graduated from Cairo University, Faculty of Science, School of Mathematics. My bachelor is in applied mathematics.
What's the difference between mathematics and applied mathematics?
As a matter of fact, it is abstract mathematics and applied mathematics. Abstract mathematics, it is you deal with completely the theory, deal only with the theory. While applied mathematics is how to apply the theory in the real world.
Okay.
And that's what they did.
Give me an example of that.
For example, my field now is applied mathematics in the medical field. And when we try to calculate risk of emerging disease such as mad cow disease or SARS, when you don't have enough data, then you use applied mathematics. It is a structure, you build mathematical structure and you solve it and try to come up with some answers that helps in public health decision.
Okay. So let's trace your life from Egypt to Canada. I guess you got married in Egypt?
Yes.
Yeah. What did your husband do?
He was a mathematician as well.
Also?
And,
Oh. So did you talk mathematics all the time at home?
Yes, of course. It's a language you understand.
Yeah. All right. And when did you come over here?
I came in 1980 for graduate school.
Did you continue your education here, or did you go to work?
No, we came for graduate school. We have scholarships, so we finished degrees in Canada, and we went to United States for further degrees, and we came back to Canada for work. My late husband at Ottawa University, and I am at Carleton University.
So you taught at Carleton University?
I taught a graduate course in statistics, and I was part of the statistical consulting team, Department of Mathematics at Carleton University.
But you got a PhD from which university?
Applied mathematics in public health from Purdue and Madison.
Purdue
University and Madison, yes.
Yeah, okay. So you're an adjunct professor?
Yes, at Faculty of Medicine.
And did you teach medical students, or did you teach people who are doing stats and mathematics?
No, we teach medical students because they like to be aware of risk assessment of, for example, when it comes to blood safety, and when it comes to medical devices cross-contamination, that we calculate the risk and what to watch for when they practice. And so I teach case study. Like I don't teach course by itself, but I've been asking to produce or introduce a case study based on our work, especially in medical devices cross-contamination, and what to look for to assess the risk. What are the steps to do a risk assessment?
And I assume that you have several publications, and okay, tell me about those.
We have quite a few publications, and that is to give us nice credibility from public health point of view. And the publication is all based on teamwork and integrated system. And we have, as a matter of fact, we published in every infectious diseases we deal with, there is publication for it. HIV, hepatitis C, SARS, mad cow disease, medical devices cross-contamination, such as syringe reuse. We have a chapter in the book on regarding that. Emerging, using the precautionary principle when we assess the risk for our public, and precautionary principle can be used when you don't have really enough data and you have to make decisions. And there are publications regarding that.
So in order to kind of publish things about that, I guess you must have also a background in virology, in bacteriology, in parasitology. Is that right? Did you have to do that too?
No, I have a team. So that's why risk assessment is a team of experts together. And also at the same time we have a lawyer as well in our team. For me as a mathematician, to build a mathematical structure, it was very important to understand what I'm dealing with, the type of the disease, the history of the disease, the emerging of the disease, route of transmission, and you have a team of experts to help you to ask all the questions and answers, give you the proper answers to the questions you have in order to build a well-rounded, comprehensive mathematical structure. It is similar to game theory and simulation programs. When I invited to give a talk, they give me an award, and they have a few here.
Yes, I asked you to bring them, so don't be shy. Please show them to the camera.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I have this I got this reward from.
Yeah, just hold it up a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I just get my. I get from Japan, from
Japan.
Yeah, and I worked with them in mad cow disease, and I get it from Sendai Medical Association, and it is a nice recognition of the research we did together.
Yes.
Yes, and
Okay.
2 years later they had a tsunami.
Well, we won't link the one with the other, I don't think. Okay, and what else?
I have this one from
this is a pyramid.
Yeah, it is from the International Heart Health Conference, and I give a nice paper, and it is from in Singapore. This is this reward I got from Singapore.
But is it a pyramid because you're Egyptian, or is it?
No, it happened that they valued our work very much. And,
all right. Okay. And what else? Show me another.
And this is we did a good. Risk assessment, and we built a structure for food safety with the minister Minister of Health in Mexico, and they gave us this award.
Okay. And there's a very funny looking one there.
Yeah, and this one is it's the sperm, because I participated on a research related to sperm bank and cross contamination and HIV programs.
Yes. So it looks like a magnified sperm.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. And some other things too.
Okay. So let's turn to. Do you think that they integrate enough, Egyptians and Arabs in general?
Unfortunately, I don't think so, because if we have integrated enough, we would have an influence in the society around us. We don't have influence.
Why is that? Why do they not integrate enough?
I'm really not sure. As part of it, maybe the training and the way we've been raised in our culture to be suppressed and not to express your opinion in a democratic way.
So we bring our baggage with us from Egypt and from Iraq and from Yemen.
Exactly. And somehow they feel like it is okay to be second. Even they were first in their culture. Why we cannot continue to be first always in any culture? So they, as if they accepting being second and being pushed around. And somehow we feel like they don't feel it. But on the other hand, the positive side, that the second generation are trying to integrate and they try to be part of the society. So that is a positive side. We can see that in the second generation now. They are independent, they are part of mainstream middle class, working class. So they are, there is a positive side of the majority of the second generation. However, there is also the marginalized group from the first generation that have been imposed in the second generation, and the kids who will come with they are highly educated, but there is no job for them. So there is some sort of maybe discrimination, maybe systematic preferences against certain nations, against certain color, against certain religion. And that's we cannot quantify that. There is a feeling of it, but we cannot quantify it yet.
But we need to expose it. We need
Of
to
course,
talk about
of
it.
course.
Frankly, amongst
Yeah.
ourselves as Arab Canadians, and also with other Canadians, so,
But if you
so
don't-
they become aware of that.
Yeah, but talking about it without having a proper study and proper information, proper data, that's need a bit of research.
Well, that's your job. You're the
Exactly, that's what-
Then that you accepted my invitation to come and talk to me, and I would like you to persuade other Arab Canadian women. I emphasize women to come because I've only interviewed Nuhat Hamad before you, and the rest were all men, and we cannot have that.
Okay.
We have to have gender equality also as far as these interviews are concerned.
Thank you.
Don't you agree?
I agree, and there are quite a few women active and
Yeah.
the achiever in their own right.
Yes.
Definitely will spread the word and will let them come to you. And I really appreciate what you are doing for the community and for amazing how you are. I don't understand how you would do that and how being active through all of these years. Books and poems and in every community. I can't just. You are really an asset to our community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. We're trying to bring to other Canadians the talents and the contributions of Canadians of Arab origin.
From Lebanon, a village called Keframishki, and my mother's parents, the great priest, Father Zarbatani, Mikhail Zarbatani, and her mother were both born in Syria. So I have Syrian and Lebanese ancestry. At one time it would just be Syrian. So I'm very much, my heart's into that ancestry.
One kind of branch, if I may call it that, of law, and that is alternative dispute resolution. And you've made that your vocation and your passion, I think.
Yes.
So tell our viewers what ADR is all about.
Well, ADR is an acronym that originated in 1972 from what's called the Pound Conference, or called Alternative Dispute Resolution. At that time, it was considered alternatives to litigation. And in 1985, I was a member of a Toronto-based law firm that had an office in Ottawa. I was doing very well, very busy, very lucrative, but I didn't feel right. I didn't feel there was a justice and a legal system. There was something missing. I had read endlessly all these scriptures, including Jesus being a mediator, and I don't remember 1 minute in law school or anywhere learning about negotiation, mediation. So in 1985, my heart told me to forget about the pocketbook, and I actually went to look for something else, that there had to be something else out there. And I found a whole new world in the alternative dispute resolution field. And in 1989, I wrote the first book in Canada on ADR that works. Can I show it to you?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
That's this
In
book.
fact, you've written more than one, so
Yeah.
we'll go over them.
It was 1989.
Yeah.
That was the first book in Canada. Then in 2010, it was put into a second anniversary edition,
Yes.
and it came
I
out.
was at the launch of that book. And
You
I
were at the
remember-
launch of that book.
And I remember that the chief of police was there too.
Yeah,
But-
the chief of police, Vern White,
Vern
was there.
White,
He's
yeah.
now a member of the Senate.
Yes.
I quote him twice in my other book. Is Everyone at the Table? 18 Life Lessons in Problem Solving. It's 18 real life stories on mediations I've done, local, national, international, including efforts with disabled persons, Aboriginal communities. They're all based on questions. Every chapter has an original quote. And the other book that came out in 1988 is a tribute to Conflict Resolution Day in Ottawa, Carleton, with the Canadian Institute for Conflict Resolution, which I co-founded, for which I was executive director from '89 to '92. Now Iman Ibrahim is the executive director. Excellent person and excellent organization.
Yes,
We
yes.
launched in Ottawa Canada's first high school peer mediation program, and we have a whole booklet about all the speeches we're given. It was very encouraging. You were there in September 2015 when 200 people gathered to honor this 30-year ADR journey. The mayor came with a plaque.
Yes, I filmed you.
You did it, and it's on YouTube. It's fantastic. You're always there. My wife said, too many awards, not enough money, but the wealth is really in the journey. But that year is the same year I was honored to receive the Order of Ottawa, which you also received. You received the United Way Community Builder. We all did that. I did that. We both wrote a couple books.
We seem to follow each other.
It's fantastic. I got the 260 weekly radio shows at ADR with Chin Radio. Then you did your series on Dialogue with Diversity. We both won 2 SEMA awards, Canadian Ethnic Media Association. So it's been a wonderful partnership we've had.
Yes, the SEMA, for those who don't know, is the Canadian Ethnic Media Association, which is in Toronto, and of course we went over there and got our awards.
Yes,
and all that.
right. And they stopped the awards at 2 because we won 2 and you won 2, so they said you can't win more than 2. But it's a great organization.
Yeah, experience, and I know that you were born in this country. I want to ask you about Arab Canadians who come as immigrants to this country, like me, for example. And 2 things. One is, do you think that they are misunderstood in Canada? That's one. And the other is, do you think that they play a sufficient role in this country? And if not, why not?
That's a lot of great questions,
yeah.
Case. I'd like to. I've learned many things with the Aboriginal community, especially from Akwesasne, but many others, on great wisdom. And one elder said, each culture is like a flower, and one day the world should be a beautiful bouquet. And we all got to water that bouquet. So to be cross-culturally competent, especially in Canada, which really is a mirror of the world, it's got everybody's here.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
I answer that in context of all the other cultures and all the other skin colors and all the other religious beliefs, is that we need to learn from each other, that we have some universal truths. And I've been thinking for a long time we should have a conference called The Sad State of Human Affairs, SSADD, Stereotyping, Stigmatization, and Denigration, Destruction. And we should learn from each other.
SSDD.
SSADD,
I like that.
The Sad State of Human Affairs.
Yeah.
I believe if we start listening to everyone else's challenges, we will be better understood ourselves. So I believe that we talk about the Arabs. I learned from great scholars, there's no Arab culture. There were people that speak the Arabic language. So we have to understand that. And it's very tribal, and it's very different. There's no such monolith called the Arabs or the Aboriginals, or everyone's got their own distinct tribes, histories. So I think we have to think that way, and people from that part of the world bring a lot of different traditions and food and music and culture, and they could be good ambassadors for the Middle East as a whole. And one thing that does happen, maybe not as well now, but people bring their conflicts from their homelands into here. Then there's another issue which was dealt with by the CSR. There's a great conference that was held, which I was honored to be a part of. It was called, Intergenerational Conflict Resolution, between people who came here as immigrants and their children are born here, and then there's that intergenerational. This is a great thing. So I think that what we should all contribute to, including that part of the world, and you were a big part of the ACUGA, the Arab Canadian University Graduate Association, and you had me be a presenter once. So it was great what you did there in terms of educational, philosophical, intellectual thinking, going out into the community and sharing all your background, getting to know each other through food and dance and music. And so I think the people who speak Arabic do that well. I really believe they do that well. And maybe what we can all do better is listen to other cultures about their histories and their stories.
Well, you mentioned what I try to do, and in fact I tried to do it through the radio show Dialogue with Diversity, and I used to interview people from different countries.
Very well.
I think did about 100 different nationalities.
Yeah, right.
And the other thing was that for the first time I established a group of conversation, dialogue between Jews and Arabs.
Yes.
And it went on for years until it kind of somehow disintegrated because of political differences. But you know, one of the quotes that you have in your book is actually by Henry Thoreau, where
Yes.
it says, "It takes two
Two to speak the truth, one to speak and one to listen.
Exactly. And this is the problem. I think we have
It's
two people
true.
speaking at the same time.
And you know what's
If people have all this innate wisdom, as you say, or not all, but a lot of people have, what is it that stops us from getting to know each other and to respect each other, to like each other, and to marry each other? And tell me what.
That's a wonderful question. Okay, in this field, it's called the gap. Now, what is the gap between? Look at all the teachings and all the great scriptures from all ancients. There's nothing new under the sun, at all. So, as my Dean of Law would have said, Dean Feeney, what we have is an illuminating glimpse into the obvious when we look at the true meaning of ADR. What is the gap? So the gap is was studied by the Carter Center a long time ago with Ben Hoffman, and it has a lot to do, in my view, with how educational systems teach the next generation. That's why we work with children and youth at the beginning, to
Right.
bring those skills to the
Yes.
next generation.
Before their minds are poisoned.
Yeah, but just teach it. And how about the fact that when you see every problem as a nail, the only solution is a hammer. So just look around today. We have legislation that talk about mediation, ADR, including the NATO legislation. We talk about restorative justice in criminal law, collaborative family law, collaborative law, the mediation, facilitation. We have all these. We have it. But when you look at the government spending, it all goes to adversarial systems. There's very little that goes to these other systems.
And at
So-
the top of all that, armaments.
That's right. So when you combine the war industry,
Yeah.
which is some of the shows I did, you combine the war industry with the extremisms in various religions who are looking for the Armageddon. It's a bad chemistry. But I believe one of my quotes is world peace through inner peace. We all have that. If we find that in each other, even when people separate, I do a lot of family law stuff. Even when people separate divorce, ADR could be a dignified resolution. Like even in the Quran, it says have a dignified divorce. The Bible, the Torah, all the great teachings say that. So it's not about, like you said, about the Arab-Jewish dialogue. Sometimes relationships run their course. You don't have to have bitterness or anger or try to hurt each other. You just move along and try to work together in a kind of a mutually caring way. Do the best you can.
Let me share with you an experience that really upset me and a light shone in my mind at the time. We had invited Bill Graham. I think he was Minister of either Defense or External at the time,
Yes.
Liberal.
Yes.
And you were part of the National Council for Canada-Arab Relations. We had invited him to be the guest speaker at our annual event. And he gave a speech, and everybody gave him a standing ovation. I and a few friends did not stand up, did not clap for him. And when the ceremony was over, we went, and he extended his hand to shake my hand, and I refused. And I said, I do not want to shake your hand because tonight you insulted us. And he was shocked. He said, how did I, what do you mean? He was really shocked. I said, in your speech, you portrayed the Palestinians as one of two. Either a terrorist that needs to be destroyed, or a refugee that needs to be pitied. And we refuse either of these labels.
And he had done that in his speech.
Yes, absolutely. In the speech, he was concentrating on how Canada is fighting terrorism, shoulder to shoulder with the USA, the Palestinian terrorism and other terrorism, and how Canada is doing a lot on the humanitarian end for the Palestinians, refugees. I said, the Palestinians are human beings who have rights, and this is what you ignored. And this is what the whole Canadian policy is ignoring, the rights of the Palestinians. You are pitying them as refugees, you are killing them as terrorists, but you're not looking at them as human beings. And this is the voice that we are missing. We need a voice that speaks not only for the Palestinians, the Syrians, the Iraqis. And unfortunately, and this is what worries me and keeps me awake at night, when we came here 20, 40 years ago, you and I and many, many others, many of them were your guests, even though we had different definitions of identity, some said we are Arabs, some said we are Syrians, some said we are Lebanese, it was a national identity. What worries me now is that we are identifying ourselves as Sunnis and Shias and Rooms and Maronites and so on and so forth. And identity is either inclusive or exclusive. If you are in a civil society, it's an inclusive identity. By definition, you say a Canadian, you could have come from anywhere, your parents, your grandparents could have come from anywhere, and you are a Canadian, period. That's it. And I think Trudeau put it so elaborately during the campaign when he says a Canadian is a Canadian, when Harper was trying to have two-tier Canadian citizenship. Now it is, if your view on God and heaven or hell differs from mine, and I happen to have the power, I'm excluding you from your human rights. Not only that, I might kill you. And this is what's happening with ISIS and with all the other religious, not only religious, ethnic. Now we have the Kurds, and at one time we had every small minority wanted to have its own little state, the Druze state, the Maronite state, the now Kurdish state, Shia state. We cannot afford this.